This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Sorry about the Monday show, all. I know I had talked about being out of town last week, so I couldn't do a Friday show. But I just did not have time over the weekend to watch and record Raw. I had to watch the WrestleWar pay-per-view plus Midsouth television, which ate up the bulk of my Saturday evening and Sunday afternoon. My mornings are basically shot now because of weekend commitments with private teaching and church. So it's really hard to find time to fit in everything, especially if my Friday nights are taken away. And I didn't get back in town until around maybe 7 on Friday. 7 p.m. By that point, I was way too tired to even think about anything wrestling related. So yeah, that's why there wasn't a Raw review this past week. Between watching the show and recording and editing everything, not worth the effort. Too much time that I didn't have. But you're getting a Friday show, and you all better appreciate this one because I really put myself through the ringer trying to watch that 3-hour WCW pay-per-view. We'll get into all of that today. Make sure you subscribe to the 5 Starr Wrestling Report if you have not already. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on Mondays and Fridays to bring you all kinds of fun classic wrestling talk. It is going to be a packed hour or so of coverage here, so let's go ahead and dive into the pay-per-view recap. Oh, before I do, can I just say, I hate snow, man. Fuck snow and anything that looks like snow. I'm so sick of this cold front. People don't know how to drive in it. Plow trucks are never out until things get really bad. It's so infuriating. I want to go back to Arizona. I liked having 5 consecutive days of sunshine. If anybody tries to make a comment telling me that they like snow or think snow is great, you can fuck right off with that comment. Anyway, on with the review.
Hey, homeboy, gather around. Some serious stuff is gonna go down. Gonna WrestleWar night, the kings of the ring. All come together and do the wild thing. Lex Luger, the stylish, Nature Boy Sting. Yeah, they all be doing that. Wild thing, yeah, they all be there with something to prove. Brimming with intentions to bust the move.
You know, it only gets funnier and funnier every time I listen to it, right? It's so unapologetically Caucasian, which I think is the appeal when I go back and watch a lot of these old school wrestling promos. They have their own special place in my heart as a wrestling fan. Indeed, WrestleWar 1990, the pay-per-view where the company had to completely reshuffle around the main event picture in basically a 3-week window. And because we didn't get a chance to review the TBS show last week, we didn't really see how the Luger face turn all came together. after he'd been a heel for the better part of the last year. Now we get to the show and he's a babyface for seemingly no reason aside from we need somebody we can flip to challenge Flair for the title. Now that the Horsemen are also heels again. So Luger was the guinea pig, so to speak. And I could spend another 10 minutes talking about the whole Luger dynamic of him flipping between face and heel throughout his career. Personal preference, I always thought Luger was much more natural on camera as a villain. But I can also attest to watching him during the peak of the Monday Night Wars. Man, when you go back and watch a lot of those old Nitros, especially between 96 and 97, one of the hottest talents in that company during that time was Lex fucking Luger, dude. That guy was so over. His finish in particular, the torture rack. Like when he would do the gesture to signal the rack, every single fan in those buildings would leap to their feet. Because they wanted to see Luger pick dudes up and put him in that rack hold. But you also kind of look and see where Luger was at here in the early period of 1990. You know, he'd been the U.S. heavyweight champion for, by now going on what, a full year? Thereabout. And remember too, originally, he was supposed to face Dr. Death on this card for the U.S. title. Not only did they completely shift gears with booking Luger to wrestle Flair for the world title instead, Dr. Death wasn't even on the card, period. I think he might have already left the company by the time this thing aired. So yeah, again, all of this last-minute changeover because of Sting blowing out his ACL in Corpus Christi earlier in the month. And the question is, did anybody actually expect Luger to win the belt from Flair here? Well, apparently everybody but Flair. There's actually more to the story when it comes to the whole Luger-Flair issue over the next couple months. I don't think it was here. I think it was the Capital Combat pay-per-view. The one with Luger and Flair in the cage. I think the rumor was that Hurd wanted Flair to drop the belt to Luger in the cage, but then Flair told Hurd to pound sand because he promised he would drop the world title to Sting. That was the plan. It was always the plan. And he wanted to wait for Sting to get healthy again so he could do business the proper way. Some might have seen it as Flair politicking his way into holding the title longer. I didn't see it that way at all. I simply saw it as Flair wanting to stick with the original plans and not giving in to Hurd's imprudent demands just because he had a vendetta against Ric from the onset. I remember being relatively indifferent toward the idea of Luger becoming the world champion around this point. I was sort of ambivalent about Luger being a world champion in WCW, period. Mainly because, you know, I really didn't see him on the same level as I saw guys like Sting growing up. I was a Luger fan in the sense that I enjoyed watching him when he was in the Horsemen. And he did some great business with guys like Barry Windham and Brian Pillman and, I mean, even Flair going back to 88. But was I ever clamoring to see Luger get a run with the top belt? Not to the same degree I was when he finally won the belt from Hogan on Nitro in 97. I think at that point it was me just wanting to see the heels get fucking comeuppance after having been virtually untouchable for the entire previous calendar year. You know, it was nice to see a babyface actually overcome the odds for a change. But I'm belaboring the point here. This is obviously not the original title match, or the original planned title match. And even though a lot of it came together last minute with very little forethought, it is still a fun match to go back and watch until we get to the finish. And I think I've talked about it before, too. You know, some of Luger's best career work was anytime he got the chance to work with Flair. It brought out the best in him. So that'll be something we cover later on. But let's go ahead and dive into the rest of the card first. We had Jim Ross and Terry Funk on headset, which is basically another way of saying JR did the bulk of the commentary and Funk would occasionally pitch in with something small to fill in silences. No offense to Terry Funk. Love him to death. But live commentary was not something he particularly excelled in. Might have also just been him phoning in the effort and saying, they're paying me, so fuck it. I don't care. So we learned at the top of the show that Dan Spivey's injured, and he will not be able to wrestle in the Chicago street fight. The best part about hearing that news is when they pitched to Teddy Long and Gordon Solie in the back for the interview. And right as Teddy mentions that Spivey's been injured before and how he would never lie to the people when he says that he's legitimately hurt, right on camera, Gordon Solie rolls his eyes and lets out a huge sigh. Pretty sure his way of saying, yeah, sure. We'll go with the theory that Spivey's actually hurt, and not just a lazy piece of shit who decided he didn't want to come to work that day. So we instead get the Skyscrapers version 3.0 versus the Road Warriors. We'll talk about that later on too. Our official opener for the card is Buzz Sawyer and Kevin Sullivan versus the Dynamic Dudes. The Dudes have now been devalued to the point where they're not even coming out to the ring with skateboards anymore. You know, the one aspect of their gimmick that actually made them look semi-cool. Now they took that away. Now they're just two blonde dorks in matching gear that still get no response from the crowd. As a prelim opener, it was fine. Most of the entertainment value in this thing was watching Sawyer act like a Neanderthal through most of it. It is kind of unfortunate that once they did away with all the JTEX Corporation stuff, you know, Buzz just automatically became a lower card status guy. Now for Sullivan, this is far and away better than what he was doing the previous month of the Clash. You know, wasn't coming out of the women's bathroom with toilet paper sticking out of his tighties. Doing painfully bad comedy with Norman. So they're doing the match. The heels are getting heat on Shane Douglas and working over his back for a bit. Johnny Ace gets in there and starts doing the comeback finale. And I can't really tell if this is their planned finish setup or if they just decided to take the match home early because it already had spiraled out of control by that point. But Johnny completely fucks up a head scissors takeover attempt to the point where Buzz couldn't even sell it. It looked so ugly. So then Buzz immediately takes over. He hits Johnny with a suplex. And then he goes up top. He hits a body splash on Johnny. And he pins him clean 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring. This is where I promptly wrote, the Dudes have officially hit rock bottom in the tag division. They're now doing clean jobs and pay-per-view openers to makeshift pairings of Kevin Sullivan and Buzz Sawyer. That is quite the fall from grace compared to what they were doing on the card last year. And you know what the really sad thing is? I share no compassion for them. Because they're the Dynamic Dudes. And they suck. Always have sucked, always will suck. Shane Douglas I have nothing against. He was just a cog in the wheel in the whole thing. But Johnny Ace, he was both bad as a member of the team and a pro wrestler, period. You know what was also bad? Norman the Lunatic versus Cactus Jack. I don't know what was worse, if I'm being honest. The actual match itself, or having to watch Norman be a creep with Missy Hyatt during his interview and beg for her to kiss and hug him before he went out to wrestle. Now, let me just say, I, for one, am usually skeptical whenever a woman refers to a guy they know as creepy. Normally, I think it's just them deflecting the conversation and trying to blame somebody other than themselves, which women are really good at. But no, I can 100% vouch that Norman was being extremely creepy with Missy Hyatt during this interview. This was not normal male behavior. Not that Norman was a normal male, but you get what I'm saying. So yeah, the match is brutal as fuck. Even more brutal is having to watch poor Cactus Job here. I know Norman was the guy they were trying to push, but still, doesn't mean it was a smart booking call. I mean, really, I don't even want to dwell on it all that much. It was slow. It was plotting. The most impressive thing here was seeing Norman get Cactus up in the electric chair, but he still botched it the first time when he tried to pick Cactus up from a kneeling position. Then Cactus went for a pile driver, but Norman turned it into a backdrop and then sat on Cactus's face with his fat ass to pin him. Just the simple fact that they actually put this on pay-per-view, that's all you need to know when it came to WCW in 1990. And it really is aggravating too, because on the one hand, they're doing all this wonky ass shit with Norman, which is death television no matter how you look at it. And then in the very next segment, the very next match on the card, it's another classic chapter in the Midnight Rock and Roll feud. It really is kind of like comparing it to a modern day AEW. Like, even when I would get great stuff like the Punk MJF feud or FTR versus Gin and Juice or whatever the team was called. I'm just pulling out cornyisms at this point. You get great stuff like that, which would only happen once in a blue moon. But then in the segment before, or even the segment after, you get the Orange Cassidys and the Wheeler Yutas and the Daniel Garcias of the world just dragging the show down and turning it back into a bad indie fed with better production. But it really is an apropos comparison, because even WCW was doing boneheaded shit like that back in the day. You get all this horrible crap with Norman the Lunatic that makes you want to gargle with salt water. Then they do the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express, and it steals the fucking show. Keep in mind, too, this is also on the same card as the Steiners versus the Andersons for the World Tag titles, which I had no memory of ever taking place. Plus, you also had Luger and Flair in the main event for the world title. And this was still by far the best match in the entire card, hands down. And to think, too, I really wouldn't even consider this among the better Midnight Rock and Roll matches in their series over the years. It was a great tag match, but in their series, it was just kind of solid. One thing I was absolutely not expecting to hear from Jim Ross was him making insinuations about the possibility of Jim Cornette being homosexual. When Stan Lane made the comment on the house mic about Cornette being one of the few men capable of stealing Ivanka away from Donald Trump, when JR said, "I didn't even know Cornette was into girls," I laughed. Although that was a pretty blatant low blow. Funny as fuck, though. So, I mean, I don't think I really need to sit here and dissect every detail about the action. The Midnight Rock and Roll feud goes back almost a decade prior to this. It's the Boston Red Sox versus New York Yankees feud of pro wrestling, so to speak. Yes, I actually looked up classic baseball rivalries just to make sure I made the correct comparison. Coming from the guy who knows nothing about sports. But these guys could pretty much sleepwalk through a great match together at this stage of their careers. I'll tell you my favorite moment in this match, and it wasn't even close. For anything, if you're going to watch this match for one particular spot, you've got to watch it to see the face-off between Jim Cornette and Nick Patrick. I've always been a fan of Nick Patrick, even though he completely fucked up the finish to Starrcade 97 and I never forgave him for it. That being said, he was such a great worker when it came time for him to be the focal spotlight in a segment. And when Cornette tried to get in his face here, and Patrick started poking at Cornette's chest, then he untucked his ref shirt and started throwing fists in the air to challenge Cornette to a fight. I shit you not when I say that got the biggest reaction out of anything in the entire match. These people wanted to see a Jim Cornette versus Nick Patrick showdown. And they came close. But what a phenomenal moment. And I don't care what critics might say. Oh, it detracted from the match. Oh, it was a stupid comedy spot. Fuck you. Got the biggest pop out of anything in the entire match. On top of what was already a great match to begin with. So this is one of those situations where if you think the spot was silly and stupid, you are objectively wrong. It was awesome. See, the thing is, this is a match purely designed for the Greensboro crowd. The reason they were so into everything is because the match that these teams had here in 1990, it was the exact same type of match that would have gotten over in the same venue back in 1986. In front of the same fans, no less. It was a completely old-school Crockett-style booking. Dusty booking, to be exact. Crockett wasn't coming up with any of this stuff back in the day. It really was a highlight reel of the best of both teams. They spotlighted the rock and roll great when Ricky was underneath selling, which is what he excelled at best. For the Midnights, it was them bumping around and overselling like crazy for the rock and roll. And they really did sell their asses off for the first 10 or so minutes. Every time the Midnights tried to gain the upper hand, the rock and roll would keep shooting them down and turn the tables in their favor. And so Bobby and Stan are out there selling like they were working with the Road Warriors at the Crockett Cup 86 all over again. Cornette worked his role to perfection, helping the Midnights gain the upper hand by hitting Ricky in the throat with a racket so they could work him over. Here's the thing you have to keep in mind, too. This wasn't going to be a spring chicken match like you would expect these teams to have in, say, Midsouth 84, or even any time during their feud in 86 with the NWA. They were older now. Robert in particular wasn't moving at the same speed he could a few years prior, so age definitely played in as a factor here. But again, the reason it got over so well is that they had a match that played to the strengths of not just both teams, but for the room. The Greensboro fans understood how to react here because they understood the style of match these teams were trying to have. And although it's probably fair to say it wasn't a perfect match in terms of execution of spots, etc., it's still my favorite match on the card simply because of what they did here and how they managed to pull the crowd in. I mean, the people reacted to big things throughout the night, but nothing on the same level of what we saw in this match here. They were in this thing from bell to bell. And this is a straight tag match with no titles or stipulations on the line. Yeah, you could maybe argue the wrong team won in hindsight. By that same token, the finish didn't come off like I think they were hoping for. They kind of botched the spot. Or I should say, Ricky missed his cue. But I don't want to hold their feet to the fire because it still got over. It still came across like a pay-per-view worthy or pay-per-view caliber match. Did it mean the same that it would have in, say, 1984, 85, or 86? Probably not. But the people recognized the history between the teams. I mean, the announcers established the long-seated rivalry and why this match had significance. It's just a shame that the president of the company was too stubborn and blind to see what was right in front of his fucking face. You can call it whatever you want, but the booking of the Midnight Express in 1990 was absolute direct sabotage from Jim Herd. You can't tell me you look at a match like this and then decide that the Midnight should be going after the U.S. heavyweight tag belts, as opposed to working with the Steiners over the summer for the world tag belts. And by that, I mean an actual program, not a one-and-done blow-off where the Steiners beat the Midnights flat and then they move on to the next program. I mean, this is a match purely worth checking out if you really want to know the history of just how clueless this company was during this time. Y'all want to know why Stan and Cornette got fed up and left in October? Go back and watch this match. Tell me the Midnights didn't earn their fucking spot in the main event picture for the World Tag Belts after this thing. It is unreal how badly this company butchered their run when the Turner regime took over. Absolute clueless retards. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the sign in the front row that read, "We've heard enough." Herd spelled H-E-R-D. That guy got it. I'm surprised the sign didn't get confiscated. Meanwhile, that was third on the card. Then they followed that barn burner with the Chicago street fight. And this is no offense to the Road Warriors or Mark Calloway, but there was no way on God's green earth they were going to be able to follow that previous tag match. They tried, but it was apples to oranges. I have no idea who the masked skyscraper was for this thing. I actually forgot there was a third skyscraper for a short window. I only remember Mark filling in when they replaced Sid at the beginning of the year. I forgot there was a third version of this failed tag team experiment. Whoever he was a much better worker than Dan Spivey. For the 4 minutes I got to see him work. By the way, I'm not sure why this was called a Chicago street fight when they were in Greensboro. I know it was Hawk and Animal's gimmick match of choice, but probably should have just called it a Greensboro street fight. It came off more like a regular Tornado Rules match than an actual street fight, even though they were all wearing street clothes to an extent. It was mostly Hawk and Animal beating the skyscrapers around before they beat the masked dude with the Doomsday. Took a hell of a bump for it, too. He did the whole flip over and everything. Credit to him, whoever he was. But there's really not much to say beyond the Road Warriors winning in about 4 or 5 minutes. It was a short match. They were another team on the outs with the company anyway. I think their last official appearance in WCW is Capital Combat, right? Unless Hawk and Animal did something during the Bash tour, which I don't remember now. But again, another legendary stable of the Crockett era, just getting burnt out and frustrated over bad management and frankly being undervalued as a tag team. It's the same thing that happened with Bobby, Stan, and Cornette. Just took the Road Warriors a few more months to finally throw in the towel and leave. I do want to say, I got an absolute kick out of the post-match angle with Doom and the Road Warriors. It was such an awkward brawl because you can tell that neither team wanted to sell for the other, even though Doom was absolutely supposed to get the better of Hawk and Animal here. The Road Warriors looked at him and said, "Yeah, how about no?" My favorite part, Animal steals a gimmick from Butch Reed, and they're drawing attention to the fact that Butch was hiding a foreign object. So when Animal goes to hit Butch, it's supposed to get this huge pop. But as soon as Animal hits Butch with the alleged foreign object, Butch doesn't even register the fucking punch. And then everyone's just in there throwing windmill punches back and forth, and crowd's sitting there like, huh? I was so confused by who the hell was supposed to be the center of focus here. Again, nobody was trying to feed for the other. It was such an amazing everybody going into business for themselves moment. On live pay-per-view, no less. The announcers were confused. The fans were confused. I was confused. It was amazing. And yes, Doom is now affiliated with Teddy Long. I don't know if they had started that build on television prior to the pay-per-view, but they came out during the match to stand by Teddy's side. And they pretty much dismissed the Skyscrapers directly after the fact. They beat him flat in the middle of the ring, and then they completely vanished. And then Teddy was seen leaving with Doom, so apparently he made the executive choice to drop the Skyscrapers altogether here. Not that I was opposed to it. It was a much more natural fit than Teddy trying to manage the team who couldn't even keep their team members straight for more than a month at a time. So this is where we reach the halfway mark of the pay-per-view. Now the big draw for the remainder of the card was every match being a championship match. And so they kickstarted that series of title matches with the Freebirds challenging the newly crowned U.S. Tag Team Champions, Tom Zank and Flying Brian. I believe this was a return match from the tournament finals. They did some comedy stuff at the beginning with two girls coming in to tease they were going to remove the Freebirds' jackets. So when Hayes and Garvin went to turn their backs to hand their jackets to the girls, Zank and Pillman had the girls leave the ring so they could turn the heels around and throw the first punch. Then they stole their jackets and taunted their poses. Gotta say, I was not a particular fan of Guy Liner Freebirds, especially Hayes. Seeing him with eye makeup on was kind of creepy. And not in a good, effective heel way. It just made him look uncanny and weird. The thing I was mainly waiting to see here was how badly Hayes and Garvin were going to try to sabotage working with Zank and Pillman. Would they actually bother to sell for them and be cooperative? The answer was sort of, depending on how you look at it. I'll get my biggest complaint out of the way first. There is no reason this match needed to go 24 minutes. At the point they reached the midway mark, this thing really started to drag for me. You know, they didn't have the added benefit of being able to work in clever manager spots like they did in the Midnight Rock and Roll match, or just clever angles, period. It was a technically sound tag match that just never really got out of second gear. I like the underdog resilience story they worked with Pillman and Zank throughout the match. You know, the Freebirds got double heat on both guys respectively. Again, do I need to watch it for 15 minutes? Probably not. Certainly not Zank selling for that long. But the people got into it, especially by the end. They were super anti-Freebirds here, which is par for the course in Greensboro. Different story in, say, places like Atlanta, GA, or even Florida. But Greensboro, yeah, they were not a popular duo in the Carolinas. One of my favorite moments in this match was Funk and Ross getting into a heated argument over whether Hayes used a right hand or a left hand to punch Pillman in the face. It was most definitely a left-handed punch, but Funk would not let Ross be correct about this. He just kept arguing it was a right-handed punch. JR was like, dude, it was on camera. Ross was also obsessed with comparing Hayes to Alice Cooper, to the point where even Funk eventually told him to stop making the similarities. I concurred. So they did kind of flatline in the middle with the Birds working over Zank for so long. Crowd started to get a bit restless with waiting for Pillman to tag in. But finally, Pillman got the hot tag and took over for a bit. It broke down quickly with all four guys before they set up the spot where Hayes tried to grab one of the tag straps to use on Pillman. But then Pillman escaped Garvin's hold, which, actually, no, that's not what happened. No, Garvin rammed Pillman into the camera guy, which the camera guy no-sold. And then Pillman immediately shoved the camera guy out of the way so he could go up top and hit a crossbody onto Garvin for the pinfall. I don't know who the camera guy was here, but he was standing on the ring apron through the entire match. And the one thing I kept thinking was, he's absolutely going to get in the way. Sure enough, prophecy came true. Of course, Garvin still had to kick out at 3.1 because he was Jimmy Garvin. He was still under the assumption that he could work like one of the Road Warriors. So naturally, he went ahead and immediately no-sold the finish afterward. That part legitimately pissed me off, too. I've seen the Freebirds pop right back up to try to get the heat back on themselves. I'm like, for fuck's sake, guys. It's not Dallas in 1983 anymore. Just stay the fuck down and let Pillman and Zank have their moment to shine. Pricks. But hey, you know what? They did the job. So it's giving them credit for something. They've actually put over Zank and Pillman twice in under a month. That was probably the most amount of good business the Birds did during their entire run from '89 up to this point. You know, beyond dropping the World Tag Belts to the Steiners last year. And speaking of the Handsome Devils, let's talk about the World Tag Title match that I seemingly neglected ever took place. A match that I debatably should have remembered, but for whatever reason did not. And in my defense, had the match been Tully and Arn against Rick and Scott, probably would have been a lot more memorable. I liked Tully, but it was 1990. He wasn't exactly on the upturn of his in-ring career by this point. He could still work, but Just throwing it out there. We indeed got a Steiners versus Anderson brothers match in 1990. And I remember making a comment on the last review how I never recall seeing these teams touch. Shows how my historical knowledge has paid off. I mean, limited by what Ole could physically do at this stage, it was still a fun tag match. Kind of a similar structure to what we saw in the Midnight Rock and Roll match earlier on the card. And the Steiners came in from the beginning and pretty much dominated the Andersons for a good chunk of it. You know, a case where the babyfaces had an answer for everything the heels tried. People really underestimate just how truly awesome Double A was when it came to selling and bumping. Like, there was a great moment here where Arn was going to try to come off the top with something onto Rick, and Rick caught him by looking at him. So Arn does the shock face, and he puts his hands out in the air, and then he just calmly gets down and smacks the ring apron out of frustration. Now, JR kind of alluded to how the heels would eventually take over, talking about how they're a master at dissecting body parts and working those over throughout matches. But if you really analyze the match in full, there wasn't any real extended heat on the Steiners. Now, the Andersons spent a couple minutes working over Scott's arm, but it only lasted that long before Rick came in and turned things around again. Like, the babyfaces largely dominated the entire flow of the match. I was a little shocked with how quickly the finish came after Rick's comeback. And it wasn't like he did anything massively impressive. He literally reversed a double clothesline attempt by kicking Arn in the face, and then he rolled up Ole with a small package cradle. Now, the bigger story coming out of this was Ole and Arn trying to re-injure Scott's arm further post-match. So even though the champions retained, Scotty's going to be favoring that arm after the pay-per-view. So we will wait and see how they follow up with that detail. It was a good tag match. Just, for whatever reason, I have no memory of ever seeing it. It's a match that gets lost in the vault, even though we're talking about two extraordinarily great tag teams by their own right. You know, the problem, it was coming after the Midnight Rock and Roll match, which blew everything else out of the water. So I don't think this ever really stood a chance. And again, the sole focus of a lot of this pay-per-view was everything going on with the Flair Sting stuff. And moreover, what ended up going down in the main event with Luger and Flair. And before we talk about the main event, Luger's promo beforehand did not really do his face turn justice. I mean, we talked about how out of the blue the whole thing was. Even in this situation, we didn't really get a whole lot of clarity on why Luger turned face right before the pay-per-view. You know, the selling point was Luger basically stealing Hawk's catchphrase and talking about how good things are for him and how bad things are about to become for Flair. The only thing on his mind right now is power slam and torture rack. He did draw attention to the fact that it's the one move that nobody's been able to break out of in wrestling. Which, we have talked about the rack being one of the more over moves in the latter years in the Monday Night Wars. There is a reason for that. And it boils down to the simple fact that it was one of the more protected moves in all of wrestling up to that point. So duh. Naturally, it was going to be super popular with the fans. It's nice when they didn't completely kill finishes back in the day. So they had poor Sting come out to the ring on crutches. And that is... it's a visual that never gets any sadder to watch. Like, you see him come out and you're like, damn. This should have been Sting's moment, man. Instead, the poor guy's hobbling out to the ring like a cripple on these damn crutches, having to watch the whole thing with a bum ACL. So by that logic, it is hard to give this a fair, objective review when you take into account that Luger wasn't supposed to be in this match in the first place. But I'll try and remove my bias and review the match as if Luger and Flair was the pre-designed plan. And actually, when you think about the Luger-Flair dynamic, and JR brilliantly talked about all this during commentary right at the beginning, when you go back to 88, whether it's the Bash or Starrcade, Luger obviously didn't win the belt from Flair. At the same time, it's been well over a year since Luger's received any kind of rematch. Now, the Bash pay-per-view had that infamously bad finish where Luger did the blade job and they did the whole ref stoppage thing. We reviewed it on the channel. I still stand by claiming it was a terrible decision to have Flair retain in that manner. It didn't work, didn't get over. It was just a bad booking call. Starrcade, that's when Flair used the ropes to cheat. So they at least had a heat finish. A good heat finish. But you think about Luger, he's been a heel through most of 89, early 90. So this is him getting his redemption on Flair after almost 2 years of waiting for this moment as a babyface. So in essence, there was a story here. It just wasn't the story they were planning to tell up until a week before the pay-per-view. I will always stand by my assertion that Luger to me was always a more natural heel. But that being said, when it came time for him to be a babyface, he had a certain kind of intensity to his matches that you really didn't see with a lot of top guys. Like, you believed Luger was a dangerous motherfucker that could beat your ass if he wanted to. He had that stoicism about him that worked so well. The real scary thing here is watching this particular match and seeing how massive Luger was in comparison to Flair. I mean, Flair was still toned, but he was considerably trimmed down here in early 90. Meanwhile, you look at Luger, he was probably in the best shape of his life at this point. And that's saying something because he was always in great shape. God, he looked like the playground bully beating up a first grader through a lot of this thing. Like the part where he snatched up Flair in the aisleway and carried him back to the ring like a child. Like Terry Funk even noted that Ric Flair was a grown-ass 240-pound man. Luger just scooped him up onto his shoulders like he was a featherweight. By the way, totally irrelevant to the conversation we're having, but I gotta say it now. Nancy looks so fine. I'm not simping, I swear. But she was drop-dead gorgeous here, man. Like, her being at ringside alone took this from a 4-star match to a 5-star match. And I hate to go to the phrase, if you've seen any Luger-Flair match in the last couple of years, you've seen them all. Flair had a formula with getting over guys he was working with. It was always basic and simple. Sell his ass off for his opponent and let them beat him from pillar to post through the whole thing. I always love it when it gets to guys no-selling his chops. It's such a recurring theme with Flair's matches now. He doesn't even try to fire back at this point. Now he just puts his head down in shame and reaches his arm out so the guy can shoot him off into the ropes and hit with a military press. He just accepts fate and lets it happen. Then Nancy's on the floor doing the dramatic, "No, Rick, please get up, Rick." Her cries of despair. And of course, they did break up the flow with Flair working over Luger's arm. Luger did a great job selling all that. It was always funny watching Nancy because anytime Flair was in control of the pace, all smiles. And then the minute Luger took over, she was like the damsel in distress doing the really overdramatic cable access reactions. Like her man was dangling off the edge of a bridge about to die. Like her arm was out. Her other hand clenched over her heart like she was about to faint. It was incredibly campy, but it worked. Because she was Nancy. No other reasoning needs to be made. She was a one of a kind. They did such a remarkable job in this match, really milking the near falls, too. Like, anytime Luger had flared down in a pinning predicament, God, those 2.5 counts spoke volumes, man. There was so much to love about this match. And then by that same token, well, it's WCW. So evidently WCW gonna WCW, am I right? It's one of those things where I go back and watch the closing 8 or so minutes. There's the argument to be had that Luger should not have won the belt here because it wasn't the original plan. But then you listen to the way the crowd was going apeshit for everything Luger was doing by the end. They wanted so badly for Luger to win the fucking belt here. I mean, in hindsight, would putting the belt on Luger here really have been such a bad idea? If only for, say, a few months. I totally get Flair wanting to drop the belt to Sting. But just going back and watching this match again from start to finish, and remember, in my defense, it's been well over 20 years since I've seen the entire thing. I honestly can say I do not remember the crowd being this pro-Luger. But like, these people are ready to burn the building down. They wanted to see Luger win the belt so badly. And they had the perfect moment to capitalize when they had Sting come out at the very end and he grabs Luger by the hair and tries to shake him up and hype him up a bit. He gets him all amped up to start firing back on Flair, doing all his signature Luger offense. And you're just on the edge of your seat because it's so hot in the room. Everybody's on their feet cheering for Luger. You want to see the finish coming. And then it keeps going and going and going. And you're starting to lose faith because you know that bullshit's about to ensue. And the minute Ole and Arn hit the ring and ran interference on behalf of Flair, that was it. You could call the finish a mile away. Sting's out there at ringside like a worm on a fishing pole in the middle of the ocean. It's just... The finish to this match is particularly baffling for a variety of reasons. I mean, they do the ref bump spot with Patrick so he doesn't see all the interference with Ole and Arn. That part was fine. But then you got Luger putting Flair in the rack, and he's got him up there in that hold for well over a minute. Nick Patrick gets up and he's, checking Flair to see if he wants to give it up. Meanwhile, Flair is literally dangling over Luger's shoulders like a dead body. Like, the guy is clearly out cold. You should just call for the bell because the match is fucking over. Flair's not getting out of this torture rack. But then Luger sees Ole and Arn grab a hold of Sting on the floor. And they're threatening to beat him up. So ever the idiot babyface, Luger lets go of Flair voluntarily. And he goes outside to get his hands on Ole and Arn. Now, of course, that part was bad alone. But what's incredibly stupid and senseless about this whole thing is that Ole and Arn are clearly getting physical with Luger while Nick Patrick is counting him out. Now, it would have been one thing to have Luger go after Ole and Arn when Patrick was still down. But the fact that he's watching as guys are interfering on the floor, yet he still makes the count on Luger and declares Flair the winner of this match. I saw that and I'm like, fuck you. That is a horrible heat finish. I knew Luger didn't win the strap here, and this still legitimately pissed me off with how they did this. This is not a good heat finish. When the fans are pelting the ring with garbage, that was what we call in the business disgust heat. That was company heat. That was you motherfuckers booked another bad dusty finish and we're not having this. And I was fully on board with how the crowd responded. That was a justified company-wide booing reaction from the fans in Greensboro. That was a moan of despair. When people talk about, man, I wonder why fans turned away from WCW in droves in 1990. Why did they give up on the product entirely? Then you trace it back to moments like this and realize, oh yeah, that's right. It's because they deliberately spat in everybody's face and didn't give a shit. Some people are going to die on the hill that Luger should not have won the belt here. I understand the logic. Frankly, if I were on the booking committee, I would probably concur in most cases. Had the people not been leaping to their feet and throwing babies in the air over wanting to see Luger win this fucking belt. Like, there's knowing when to call audibles and listen to the crowd. They had to have known that doing this finish was not going to get over well with the Greensboro crowd. They made Luger look like such an idiot after he had to take his focus off the match when he had the damn thing won. That's how you bury a babyface. And it made Sting look like a moron for willingly staying out there when the Horsemen were all surrounding the ring like a pack of dogs. They buried the ref. They buried the company by booking a bad finish that reflected on the way the crowd responded. It was a horrible call. Luger gets fucked. Again. Just tally that up on the Luger falling short of the mark when it counted the most during his career. Another case of him not being able to get the job done. I really hate to shit on the finish here because I love so many aspects about this match. But bad finishes can sometimes overshadow the good elements of a wrestling match too. People will try and argue that, but I find it to be true in a lot of cases. A match can be going along great, but if the finish is poorly booked, that's what everybody remembers. And the lasting image you see on this pay-per-view is people throwing garbage at the ring because the babyface challenger looked like a damn fool when he had everything going in his favor. That's the problem. Luger had the match won. I don't know. It's a great match. But that finish, man. Fuck that finish with a 10-foot pole. It really is a tough show to give a final grade on. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with a lot of aspects of WrestleWar 90. There's some really, really good stuff on this card. But there's also some really, really bad stuff too. It's one of those pay-per-views where there isn't a whole lot of middle ground. It is a pay-per-view worth checking out. especially for the Midnight Rock and Roll match. Steiner's and the Andersons was really good. And even though it's an incredibly frustrating finish, Flair versus Luger was still great. So go watch all those. The rest of the show you can pretty much skip. Okay. So Midsouth opened with quite the monologue this week. I was not expecting a Bill Watts fiery, passionate babyface promo. But I guess after what occurred the other week, he felt the obligation to set the record straight. Now, bearing in mind that we missed last week, we need to talk about the footage that apparently was too distasteful to show this week. And that distasteful footage you might be wondering about? It was Ted DiBiase vandalizing Hacksaw Duggan's car in the parking lot. Keep that in mind for what I'm about to address in this Watts promo. So, because DiBiase demolished Duggan's car in a tape that was too sensitive to air for everybody to see, this particular incident, this particular angle, so to speak, was enough for Watts to finally rescind the gimmick-banning rule in Mid-South. He is now lifting the rule entirely and saying that guys are now permitted to fight fire with fire in order to protect themselves. So after, a year? Now the 2x4s, chains, tennis rackets, and dog collars are legal again. Not because DiBiase beat the shit out of Duggan in the parking lot, but because he destroyed his car. Now, some of you may be thinking, sounds like a lazy excuse for Watts to find a reason to make gimmicks legal in Mid-South again. Which is how it came across to me. And I'll be honest, the whole gimmick barring thing in Mid-South has been pretty lackadaisical in how it's been enforced over the last year. It served a storyline purpose for the time. Now it's just kind of superfluous. I mean, we've already seen that rule broken at least a dozen or so times since they instituted the rule in the first place. So I'm okay with them lifting that whole stipulation. I just found it funny how that was the way they decided to lift the rule. Duggan got his car destroyed. A despicable act that cannot be shown on television and must require weapons to be legalized in Mid-South again. In order for everybody to protect themselves. And or their property, apparently. So from there, we go to the ring for a television title match between Terry Taylor and Tim Horner. It's a lot of alliteration. It's a good, solid little wrestling match. I know it always seems like I'm looking for a reason to bash Tim Horner. But as long as they keep the mic away from him, he was a good hand. Pretty short little get-over win for Terry here. I mean, they did let Horner shine a little bit throughout, but it was a pretty cut-and-dry layout. Terry got the win with a backslide. Then they went back to the interview booth with Boyd Pierce and the Cowboy for an interview with Duggan. And this was basically their way to clarify the rule of barring weapons being annulled. So Duggan immediately reveals his coal miner's glove, which Bill Watts has to then try and downplay by telling Duggan that this isn't a situation where the boys can start taking advantage and using weapons as they please. It's only in situations where they're vulnerable or need equal opportunity protection. And it is important to remember as well, they had mentioned Dr. Death using his orthopedic arm brace to cover up that injury he sustained when Duggan drove his arm into the ring post a few weeks ago. So they are at least acknowledging that the heels are overstepping their boundaries again. So now the babyfaces can at least reasonably fight back without being punished or fined. We did get a great pro-America line from Watts here when he was talking about banning guns in the country, making a comparison to the weapon banning rule in Midsouth. A lesson that I think a lot of anti-gun or anti-Second Amendment people ought to understand. You can outlaw guns using legislative power. Doesn't mean that bad people won't find a way to get a hold of guns anyway. And it's always the argument I make whenever people try to debate the whole universal gun banning thing or whatever the activists try and push. I hear that conversation and I'm like, you do understand that imposing gun bans won't actually solve the issue of gun violence, right? Like the people that are responsible for gun violence, whether we're talking about drug cartels or crazy people with mental deficiencies, those people are still going to find ways to access guns regardless. All you're doing by taking guns away from people that legally have them is preventing them from being able to defend themselves and innocent bystanders. The argument's always been stupid. That's why I always scoff whenever somebody brings up the idea of imposing gun bans nationwide. The hell is that going to solve? Other than putting people's lives in more jeopardy. People have been trying to make that a political issue for as long as I've been alive. To me, that's not even an issue of left versus right. That's just outright lack of common sense and reason. But what the hell do I know? So then we came back for Tom Pritchard versus gorgeous Gino Hernandez. Yeah, a lot of world-class talent making the jump this week. A lot of them were working dates for Watts. With Kerry von Erich on the show, gorgeous Gino, Kamala. The Iceman's been a regular lately. They did say a couple times throughout the show that Chris Adams would be here in a couple weeks. It's funny because I'm always mentioning how 1985 was the beginning of the drop-off for world-class in terms of reasonably good television. But I think I'm starting to understand why now. It's because all their top talent was in Midsouth around this time. It was sad, too, seeing Gino stand in the ring for this match. Then you realize he's not even alive for another full calendar year after this point. What a damn shame. Here's the crazy thing, and it's insane when I go back and watch this footage. Gino was already a well-established heel in world class by this point. This was 1985, so he and Chris Adams were already well into the run as a dynamic duo, the top heel team in the territory, essentially. But Gino was getting wildly cheered by the end of this thing. And I was sitting there watching like, do the Mid-South fans not know that Gino's like the biggest heel in Dallas right now? How the hell is he so over in Mid-South despite being so massively hated in world class? It was so weird. Now, before we get into the match here, one of the ongoing feuds they've been developing right now is the issue between Jake Roberts and Terry Taylor over the TV title. Roberts has now been screwed over twice in title shots, not even getting a chance to properly wrestle for the belt. So he's now directly calling out Taylor and making the challenge. He wants his TV title shot on Mid-South television at the Irish McNeil Boys Club, and he wants it now. He sounded like Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka. He wants it now. I can just hear the whiny, petulant, teeny bopper voice as we speak. So after declaring that he wants his TV title shot now, Well, he then leaves the ring to let the match get underway. So apparently by now, he meant sometime after the match ended. It is always fun seeing a young Dr. Tom. Crazy to think, too, he'd been in the business for what, 5 or 6 years by this point? I mean, to think he was already that good before ever really wrestling in a major territory. Now, actually, I think he was in Georgia for a while, right? Before he started doing jobs in Midsouth. It was either Georgia or Florida. One of the two territories. But it was still essentially a get-over squash for Gino. Yeah, Gino, I remember, had made sporadic appearances in Mid-South, but it was mainly a part of the talent exchange deal that Watts and Fritz had going on around that time. About a year before Fritz had withdrawn from the NWA agreement and kept all of his top talent regional. Then you flash forward to 86. That's when things got really hostile between Watts and Fritz. When Ken Mantell left Dallas and took like half the talent pool to go work for Watts. At least by this point in 85, they were still on good terms. And more of that crossover history now that we've started overlapping all the world-class reviews we did in the last several years. From there, we had Dr. Death and Ted DiBiase versus Brad Armstrong and Terry Daniels. This match is incredible. So, well, it's just kind of a normal tag match for a while. Nothing out of the ordinary. There were dueling chants when Brad was getting worked over by the heels. We had "Go Brad, go," followed immediately by a handful of men in the crowd screaming "No," which I thought was hilarious. So then Terry gets the hot tag and starts making the comeback. And he comes out of the corner with a crossbody attempt onto DiBiase, but ends up taking out Carl Fergie when DiBiase moves out of the way. And so after they dispose of Daniels and start ganging up on Armstrong 2-on-1, that was Duggan's cue to hit the ring with the loaded glove to try to go after the heels. It should be noted, by the way, that the heels were not actually using gimmicks on Brad here when they were beating him down. Yes, it was a handicap situation, but this was a blatant misuse of gimmicks on Duggan's part. So naturally, when he gets in the ring to go throw a punch at DiBiase, DiBiase throws Armstrong in front of him to block the punch, so Duggan accidentally knocks him out. Then Duggan's all concerned as the other officials get in the ring to try to check on his lifeless carcass. Oh, and to make matters even better, the heels won by DQ. So yeah, Duggan ended up becoming more of a nuisance here than an actual help. He not only cost the babyfaces the match, but he also ended up KOing one of them with a coal miner's glove. Way to go, Duggan. You done fucked up twice. He's lucky Brad was a nice guy and didn't hold grudges. So then... Oops. Almost got lost in my notes there. So then we had the debut, or at least I think it was the in-ring debut. It's the Barbarian taking on Shawn Michaels. And before we all get too excited and start going back to the well with Paul Jones impressions from the NWA television in 1986, no, unfortunately, it was not that Barbarian. It was not the Bar-bearing, the other half of the Powers of Pain, or the Faces of Fear. No, this is a completely different Barbarian. However, you might recognize him once I mention the name John Nord, a.k.a. Nord the Barbarian, or for all of you WWF fanatics of the early 90s, he was better known there as the Berserker. Another one of Vince McMahon's genius gimmick ideas. He actually had several gimmick repackages throughout his career, but those are the two primary ones that people remember. The ones that got the most mainstream attention. Here he was managed by General Akbar. I presume he was a member of the army, although I don't think they ever directly mention anything about that here. Of course, they fed Shawn to him, which I enjoyed for a variety of reasons. A lot of what the Barbarian did here was an extension of the gimmicks he used in other territories during his career. The out-of-control wild man type persona, which he worked well. He was sort of a missing link gimmick knockoff, which is probably not the best comparison because you all know what I think about the missing link. But it was a short, concise squash. Killed Shawn in about a minute and won with the elbow drop. I honestly don't recall a whole ton about anything Nord did in Midsouth before he left. I don't think he was there that long. I know he ended up going to work for Dallas sometime in the next couple years. Then obviously there was the WWF run after that. Very impressive looking big guy. But in the pantheon of all-time great big guy workers, and John Nord usually doesn't get mentioned. For me, I didn't watch a great deal of his work growing up to really form an opinion. I was only sparingly watching the WWF product as it was in the early 90s. Let's just say the Berserker wasn't exactly a character that enticed me to want to pay attention. But that wasn't his fault. And then we had the Iceman taking on Kamala. This has been a long-standing feud in both Dallas and Mid-South for a while now. And we're finally getting to see the two come to blows. It's also been an extension of the beef between the Iceman and General Akbar, going back to the fireball angle on Dallas from not that long ago. And so, well, once you overlook the giant wad of nothing in the middle of the match where Kamala was pinning the Iceman down in a nerve hold, twisting his nipple for about an hour, that part sucked. But the last minute was pretty good. And by that, I mean everything that happened after the DQ run-in from Hercules Hernandez. So the Iceman's making his comeback. Then right as he's about to set up Kamala for the big climax, we had Sheik Hercules hitting the ring to go after the Iceman. That leads to Kamala trying to go up top while the Iceman and Hercules are doing a grappling session on the mat. But right before Kamala can come off, Butch Reed hits the ring to do the press slam and make the big save. And then we get this awesome moment where Butch Reed drop kicks Kamala to the floor. And you see Kamala taking off toward the back like a scalded dog. It was a great visual on camera too, because they show Kamala way off in the distance running for his life. And then Akbar's trying to wave to the camera like, "What are you doing? Don't film this." It was tremendous. And hey, imagine that. They didn't need to bring gimmicks as part of the angle. Let that be a lesson to Hacksaw Duggan. You can make the valiant save for your fellow babyface brethren by simply coming out to the ring with a taped fist. You don't need no damn coal miner's glove. Come on, man. Sound like Joe Biden all of a sudden. God help me. You know, again, dude, it's Kamala. What you see with him is what you get. You're never going to get great epic in-ring spectacles with any of his matches. It's all smoke and mirrors. But they still got the people hooked by the end of it. So credit to them. And that brought us to the Dirty White Boys getting a quick squash win over Dave Bowman and Mike Jackson's. Yes, you heard that right. Jackson plural. Even though it was never plural prior to the show. Must have been a typo. But yeah, not a whole lot to say about this one. Denton got the win on Bowman with a fallaway slam, Delia Bob. It was basically a precursor to the real draw on this week's card. That being Kerry von Erich's appearance. They saved this one for the main event. And what a main event it was. Kerry von Erich versus Nature Boy Buddy Landel. You had to figure somebody was going to be the fall guy for the modern day warrior. Budrow's typically a good safe fall guy. The kind of guy you could beat till kingdom come and he still wouldn't lose any of his heat. That's how great Buddy was. I have absolutely no idea why they spelled Eric as E-R-I-K. There were a lot of weird, strange spellings with the name graphics this week. So, to the shock of absolutely nobody, the ladies were fawning over Kerry as soon as they pitched to the ring. It only got progressively louder when he took off his robe to reveal his Greek-like body. Even Watts couldn't help out but mark out for it. Now, Kerry had a lot going on story-related around this time. I think they were still in the midst of the Ric Flair NWA World Title feud after Kerry had won the belt the previous year at Texas Stadium. I remember they were building up some kind of big rematch the following year. There might have also been a televised Flair-Kerry match in '85 in Dallas. It was either him or Kevin. Can't remember now. Now, this is still a year before he broke his ankle, and everything kind of shifted in Kerry's career from that point forward. But he was just as over in Midsouth as he was working in Dallas, which truly is saying something about him as a nationwide star. I think Jim Cornette did a recent podcast episode where somebody asked a question on the topic of Kerry, and you know, if you remove the substance abuse issues and all the personal crap going on in his life, also had he lived longer, could Kerry have been on the same level as a Hulk Hogan or a Bruno Sammartino in terms of top box office drawing ability? You know, the thing a lot of people forget is how badly Vince was trying to get Kerry right at the point the national expansion was happening. I mean, this was '84. Kerry was still a huge money draw in the Dallas market. But Vince was so enamored by his look, and he'd already started coming up with ideas on how to market Kerry so he could have potentially brought him in as a top babyface in the WWF, which would have really changed the landscape of history had things panned out that way. When you think about it, we probably wouldn't be talking about Hogan in the same light. He would have been another flash in the pan as far as we're concerned. It really is fascinating because, you know, for the people that only watched the WWF and never saw Kerry outside that bubble, their only perspective on him is everything he did as a middle card guy who wasn't anywhere near his peak performance level by 1990 or 1991. God, you go back and rewatch all this old footage with him. Kerry was so over, man. So over. It's one of the biggest what-if scenarios to never actually play out in wrestling history, but man, if only. What would have happened had Kerry gone to the WWF several years before he did? How would the business have been entirely rewritten? It makes you wonder. But anyway. I don't know if I mentioned Kerry won with the claw. Goes without saying. I wish they would have ended the show right there, but... well, you know. Nepotism runs in the family, unfortunately. And it wouldn't be Mid-South television if Watts didn't have to try and force footage of his sons on camera, would it? It's one thing to put Joel out there on the headset, exposing him worse than Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. But now he's got to filter in tape of his other two sons, Micah and Eric, the future stars of professional wrestling. Almost a direct quote from Watts. Yes, the future stars of pro wrestling in the 90s, ladies and gents. Micah and Eric Watts. God help us all. Micah didn't even make it out of the starting block. We all know the story of Eric Watts in wrestling. The less said about his career, the better. I don't even know what the hell the point of any of this was. They showed film of Eric and Micah training with Kerry and Jim Neidhart. Like Micah was doing shot put throwing with Neidhart. They showed Eric on the basketball court and the football field because he was heavily active in sports during that time. I mean, JR was doing an admirable job trying to put him over, but I'm just like, why am I watching this? Who the fuck cares about Micah and Eric Watts potentially being interested in professional wrestling when they're older? They were what, 15 here? This was absolute filler television and nothing more. Look, I'm not trying to give him a hard time. I'm all for being a family man. I know Watts thought very highly of his kids. But let's just call a spade. Whether it's Joel, Micah, or Eric, they were not blazing personalities. Nobody was looking at these guys and thinking, man, talent runs in the Watts family. No, the cowboy was a special one-of-a-kind talent. His sons, they didn't have it. Sorry to be that guy. I'm just being blunt. Go watch Eric Watts from back in the day and tell me he came anywhere close to filling his father's shoes. So yeah, this sucked. Absolutely no reason for this to air. But remove that, extract that from the program. It was a good show. You know, again, it was a lot of Dallas talent crossover, but it all worked. They were still super over. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, but every single feud on this program has a purpose. It's great. I'm enjoying Mid-South 85 so far. But, yeah, that's all I got for this one. So, we will wrap it up there. Again, I'm sorry about the Monday show. It just didn't happen, unfortunately. The plan, though, is to get back to form. I don't know how long that'll last, but there will be a Monday show this week. Don't worry. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We will talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace out.